Okay, what we're going to do now is that we're going to go ahead and trace out our pattern onto the primary leather. Now, one of the things I always like to do, and that is, I always like to look at the front side of the leather to make sure there's no marks or anything that I don't want on my the product that I'm ready to make. So this is nice and clean. So what I would do, I would turn it over. Myself, I always like to trace from the back side because if you make marks on the front side and you decide to change your mind, you know what, that's a piece you will not be able to use for that particular project that you're working on. But if you trace on the back side, if you make a mistake, you know what, no problem. There's a couple of ways that, well, there's a few things you can use. You can use an ink pen, but the thing about the ink pen is that when you cut out the pattern, if the ink tracing is still on the back of the leather, when you roll it up, it can transfer to the front part of your leather. So we try not to use the ink pen. Sometimes we do, but we try not to. What we try to use mostly is tailor chalk. And this is a wax, like a soap type of chalk, and you just take it, trace out the primary. Now what I'm doing, I'm also keeping pressure on the pattern, so the pattern do not move on me while I'm tracing. And it's these notches that I made, I'm not going to worry about those right now. I will worry about that when we trace out the secondary leather. So I've got that traced out. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut this out, and I'm going to use the ruler, and I'm going to use a rotary cutter. This rotary cutter, I only use it for straight lines. Some people can use it when they're doing curves, but I like using it strictly with straight cuts. And I will also do another video to talk about tools and how to use the tools, how to use the tools safely. But right now we're going to go ahead and cut out the primary. Now notice one of the things that I'm doing is that as I'm cutting, I'm walking my hand, and that way I'm keeping pressure on top of the ruler so it doesn't move on me. So what I do, I open up the rotary cutter, I push down, cut, walk my fingers, cut, walk my fingers, cut, walk my fingers, cut. Then I close the cutter. Now what I'm going to do is cut out the bottom. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to remove the hide, so I'm not trying to turn and cut with the whole hide. So now I'm going to turn this. I always turn the leather. I never try to reach around and cut like this or cut this way. I would turn the leather so I'm always behind it. Make this cut. Now because this have a curve to it, I would take my leather scissors And when you cut in leather, it's not like cutting fabric. You don't try to speed cut. You take your time and get very good clean cuts. Me, myself, I'm more about craftsmanship than I am about designing. You learn the craftsmanship and the designing will come with it. Now this is the bag. Now I like putting something on my bag, so what we're going to do, I've got a piece of remnant and we're going to put this piece on here. So I'm going to cut away. Now, what I'm going to do is that, oh, that'll work. I'm going to glue it on just like that. And then once I glue it, I will sew this on before I put the lining on. Because if I sew it on after I put the lining on, you'll be able to see the stitch mark from the back side. So to avoid that, I'm going to stitch this before I put the lining on. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is, like I said, what I want to do is glue this piece onto my primary and then sew it. But before I do that, what I'm going to do is edge coat around the edges. And the reason why is because right now the edges looks raw. So what I want to do is to edge coat that to where it looks finished. And that goes back to where you will hear me say this over and over again. For me, it's about the craftsmanship. A lot of times we just make things, but we really don't think about the craftsmanship. And that's what's going to get people to start talking about who you are and what you do, is because of the craftsmanship. So edge coat, this is what we use. It's a water base. It washes off your hand very easily. Some leather, if it gets on there, you can wipe it off. When you're working with something like suede, any type of leather that's close to suede that just sucks in whatever touches it, you have to be very, very careful with it. But really what you want to do is practice being neat, taking your time and being very, very neat. So what we're going to do is that we're going to edge coat this piece and then we will glue it to the primary. Now we use two types of glue really. We use, this is a Leathercraft cement, get it from Candy Leather Factory. And this leather is water-based, it's not toxic. We use it for different types of application. And I will show you the different types of application that we use this. This is a contact cement, also come from Tandy Leather Factory. And this glue is what we're going to use to apply this overlay onto the primary, which is a patent leather. And the reason why is because this glue, once you apply to the back of this leather, it will stick to this patent leather much easier than this water-based glue. And because we need for it to stick so it can hold until we sew it. It's not for it to be to stick it to where it's permanent. The glue is not being used for something permanent. It's being used to hold this overlay onto the primary until we can sew it. Okay, so I'm going to take some edge coat. You never want to shake this. You stir it. Never shake it. If you shake it, you're going to have bubbles, and it's just not going to apply the way it should. And you do not need a lot when you're working with this. People use different ways to apply this. I like using a Q-tip and the very tight Q-tips. Some Q-tips are very loose. I like them very tight. Okay, so now I'm going to let this dry for a couple of minutes, and then I will glue it to the primary piece of leather. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the contact cement. What I normally do is I normally let it dry for a couple of minutes, so in that way it's more tacky than it is wet. And because once I put it onto the primary, if I need to pull it up, I don't have a mess. It's almost like using a double stick tape. It will attach, but it's not wet, it's not messy. So that's why I always let it dry just a couple of minutes, and it doesn't take long for it to dry. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this, lay this on top like that. Press this down. I'm going to let that dry for a couple of minutes, and then we will go over to the sewing machine and we will sew it. And what I will do, I will start sewing from this point right here, and I will sew all the way around. Come all the way around to the front, all the way back here, and then I will come back to where I started, and then I will do my back stitch. And my stitch is about 1/8 of an inch, and so like I say, I'll start here. going to come back to my starting point, and that's why I will do my back stitch. Now I'm going to do my back stitch. And this is what it's going to look like. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to glue the primary onto the secondary and then put in the magnetic clasp.